I've read that on one Sunday morning in 1941, in the Nazi-occupied Netherlands, a mysterious character rode up on his bicycle and entered the Calvinist church. He ascended the podium and read aloud the story of the midwives who saved the Hebrew babies and defied Pharaoh's policy of genocide. That is, he read the very text we will be reading tomorrow morning from this week's Torah portion. When he was finished, he posed 3 questions to his congregation. "Who is today's Pharaoh?" he asked. "Hitler," the congregation replied. "Who are today's Hebrew babies?" "The Jews," they answered. "And who will be today's midwives?" He left the church, leaving his question hanging in the air. Though we don't know what they all might have answered, a group of them, as it turns out, took on the responsibility themselves. During the war from 1941 to 1945, 7 families from this little church hid Jews and other resistors from the Nazis. 7 families took on the challenge of being the midwives of their time. They took the lessons of this week's parasha to heart. Our Torah portion teaches us that in the darkness of night, these humble midwives, Shifra and Pua, pursued hope and life. In spite of the king's edict, they found the moral courage to do what midwives do, to bring new life into our world, and they offered spiritual resistance. And this pastor utilized this holy text to rouse his congregants to do the same thing. His words, his questions made a tangible impact, as words do. Tonight, I'm asking us to recognize the power of our words. We are taught in the Zohar that in Egypt, the power of speech was in exile. And yet rabbinic commentary also says that the word Pesach is related to peh and sach, meaning talking mouth. So how can the power of speech be in exile amidst lots of talking mouths? It's not that the power ceased, only the recognition of the power of speech disappeared in Egypt. People spoke without thought of the consequences, and this caused fear and anger to grow. And this, we know, is unacceptable. We must always remember the truly great power of our words. If there is one lesson that we must take away from the events of this week, it is to finally and fully learn the lesson that words matter. We've spent weeks, but in reality, there have been many months and years when words have been spoken by our leaders, politicians, and influencers that have stoked the flames of hatred, that have encouraged distrust of our institutions, and that have laid the groundwork for Wednesday's events. After weeks of hearing that the election was fraud, that cheating had taken place, that there had been a subversion of the electoral process, it's hardly surprising that after an invitation to gather in Washington, D.C., the protesters decided to take matters into their own hands. A protesting mob became a criminal crowd and ultimately might be best labeled as terrorists attempting a coup against our own country. But words were the match that ignited the fire that engulfed the Capitol. Of course, actions are important, and a person must be held accountable for them. But all too often we excuse words as just talk. We imagine that they emerge from a person's mouth and essentially fall to the ground. But we know that once spoken, words have a tremendous power to harm, to cause destruction, and to ignite flames that burn long after the words are spoken. Jewish tradition takes the words that we speak very seriously. We're commanded to use our words not to harm, but to heal, not to put down, but to rise up, not to attack the dignity of others, but to lift up the cause of justice. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs notes that language in Judaism is the basis of creation, revelation, and the moral life. It is the air we breathe as social beings. Hence the statement in Proverbs, death and life are in the power of the tongue. Likewise, the verse in Psalms, whoever of you loves life and desires to see many good days, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from telling lies. Never take language lightly, implies the Torah. For it was through language that God created the world, and through language that we create and sustain our social world. It is essential to our survival, as essential as the air we breathe. In the spirit of the Hebrew prophets, we now need to use our words to call out incitement, racism, anti-Semitism, and incredible hypocrisy. You don't get to condemn the fire when you helped pour the gasoline. I fully believe rioting of any kind should not be glamorized. I also believe this is not the time to indulge in whataboutisms and draw false equivalencies. But wherever we stand on the political spectrum, we can all certainly agree that what happened on Wednesday was a uniquely dark day for our country. In my opinion, it was also completely foreseeable and preventable, and that is on us. We are deeply divided as a nation, but we are not caught in an inevitable spiral of fate. This week can be a wake-up call and choice to never repeat this past period of time. We can personally take responsibility for our democracy. It's not enough just to pay your taxes and serve on a jury and occasionally vote. We need to be actively involved in creating the society we want to be part of. I believe that begins by each of us personally utilizing the power of our speech and by demanding that all Americans are held accountable for the words and ideas they share with others. I know it sounds impossible. The lies and anger have grown too great. But in this week's Torah portion, we read about Moses at the burning bush. Moses sees a bush on fire, but it's not consumed. Our nation, too, can sometimes be aflame, but we will not be consumed. Not if we take care of our home, not if we stop engaging in harmful, hate-filled rhetoric. We need to make sure every word we offer is one that speaks to truth and justice. With words, God created the universe. God said, "Let there be," and there was. Through words, God communicated with humankind. In Judaism, language itself is holy. Once our words are launched, they take on a life of their own. Rabbi Israel Salanter, the founder of the Musar movement, reminds us that not everything that is thought should be said. Not everything that is said should be repeated. And not everything that is repeated should be remembered. The message that our words are important, that our words have meaning and power, runs throughout Jewish tradition. It appears virtually everywhere you turn in our sacred texts. And while sometimes it is, of course, appropriate to use our words to ignite a passion for justice, to try and speak of wrongs that have been done, these words too must be chosen carefully, with their potential consequences understood. Our Torah portion speaks to the power and importance of righteous civil disobedience. Just as the pastor who utilized this text to move his congregation in 1941 upheld this biblical example of resistance to encourage his congregants to heroically defy an unjust reality. But more than anything, this text speaks to the power of every human being. It's not simply our leaders who can affect change, but all of us. We have seen what destructive words can do, but we also know that words can heal. Words can repair what was once broken. Words can bring us back together. While at the burning bush in this week's Torah portion, Moses and God speak and they share words. Moses asks God for God's name and God responds, Ehiyah Asher Ehiyah. It is this enigmatic Hebrew that is really difficult to translate, but is most literally understood as, I will be what I will be. This is a name of promise and possibility. It's a name that is not yet defined. It is a name with stories still to be written. It is all about the future potential. America, too, is Nihiyeh asher nihiyeh. We will be what we will be. There is promise and possibility. There is future yet to be defined, and there are stories still to be written. Wednesday was a dark day where we saw the danger of words inciting hate and violence. But it was also a day that ended with words of healing, words of unity, and words of comfort. We have the power to choose the words that we will add to the American story, to ensure that we reach up to our highest ideals, follow our best inclinations, and recreate here a beacon of democracy, promise, and hope. Shabbat Shalom.